Change rarely begins with a single shout, yet history often turns when quiet voices decide they have waited long enough and discover that patience, when stretched too far, transforms gently into determination. What happens when roles that feel permanent suddenly feel unfair, and everyday routines reveal invisible limits placed carefully around half the population for reasons nobody can fully explain anymore? At first, nothing looks dramatic because the streets, homes, and workplaces seem unchanged, even while questions begin to gather like clouds that do not yet promise a storm. This story begins not with revolutions, but with realization as women across societies start noticing the gap between what they contribute and what they are allowed to decide. The paradox appears early, since women carry families, economies, and traditions forward, yet are asked to remain silent when shaping the future those efforts support. That tension, once felt individually, slowly becomes shared, and shared feelings have a surprising way of growing louder without raising their volume. In many societies, daily life for women followed clear patterns as expectations shaped education, work, and public presence from childhood onward. Girls learned skills meant for homes, while boys trained for politics, trade, and authority, creating a system that felt natural because it repeated itself endlessly. Custom worked like gravity, invisible but powerful, keeping choices close to the ground. For centuries, this arrangement appeared stable, even comfortable to those who benefited most. Yet stability can hide strain, strain waits patiently. Industrialization and expanding education began shifting this balance because factories, offices, and schools needed labor, attention, and organization beyond traditional boundaries. Women stepped into new roles, sometimes temporarily, sometimes permanently, discovering abilities that expectations had never tested. Earning wages introduced independence, even when conditions remained unequal. Work revealed capability, capability encouraged confidence. Confidence questioned rules. At the same time, ideas traveled faster through newspapers, books, and conversations, carrying discussions about rights, citizenship, and fairness into kitchens and classrooms. Women read about freedom abroad while experiencing limits at home. Contrast sharpen awareness, awareness fuels curiosity. Curiosity challenges acceptance. This quiet intellectual movement mattered deeply. Social gatherings, salons, and reform groups created spaces where women exchanged experiences that once felt isolated. Listening revealed patterns rather than accidents. When many stories match, explanations weaken. Shared understanding replaces private doubt. Support networks grow without announcing themselves. Momentum builds softly. Education became a turning point because learning teaches not only facts but comparison, allowing people to measure their lives against alternatives. Educated women noticed inconsistencies between democratic ideals and everyday practice. If laws valued fairness, why exclude voices? If nations praised liberty, why limit participation? Questions multiplied, answers felt outdated. Resistance appeared immediately, since systems protect themselves by arguing tradition, stability, or danger. Change was portrayed as disruptive rather than corrective. Women demanding inclusion were labeled impractical or unfeminine. These labels attempted to slow discussion, yet discussion continued anyway. Ideas proved harder to contain than actions. Early demands focused on practical concerns such as property rights, education access, and legal recognition within marriage. These goals reflected daily realities rather than abstract theories. Improving life required practical reforms. Small changes felt achievable. Achievable goals invited participation. Participation strengthened movements. Public demonstrations gradually emerged, sometimes orderly, sometimes controversial, always visible. Women stepped into streets, halls, and debates traditionally reserved for men. Visibility challenged assumptions instantly. Presence itself became an argument. Observers could not ignore them. Society was forced to react. Media attention transformed local actions into national conversations, allowing supporters and critics to respond widely. Public opinion shifted unevenly, moving forward in some places, resisting fiercely in others. Change never travels at one speed. Progress zigzagged, victories mixed with setbacks. Persistence mattered most. Family dynamics also shifted because conversations about rights entered homes alongside political discourse. Support sometimes came from unexpected allies, including men who recognized unfairness firsthand. Opposition also came from within families. Personal relationships reflected broader conflict. History played out privately, the personal became political. Legal systems eventually responded, often slowly, with debates that exposed contradictions long ignored. Granting rights required redefining citizenship. Redefining citizenship reshaped nations. The process involved compromise and courage. Nothing arrived overnight. Time-tested commitment. Throughout this period, women balanced demands for change with existing responsibilities, managing families, work, and activism simultaneously. This balance demonstrated resilience rather than rebellion. Movements survived because life continued around them. Ordinary persistence sustained extraordinary progress. The effort was exhausting, the impact lasting. Importantly, demands were not identical everywhere, as culture, class, and history shaped priorities. Some focused on voting, others on labor protections or education access. Differences sometimes caused disagreement. Disagreement did not erase purpose. Diversity strengthened adaptability. Movements learned flexibility. Opponents often predicted chaos, arguing that expanded rights would weaken society's structure. History repeatedly tested that claim. Each reform adjusted systems rather than destroying them. Life adapted calmly. Fear proved exaggerated. Reality continued forward. As early successes appeared, they inspired others, demonstrating that change was possible rather than imaginary. Success bred courage. Courage invited new voices. Momentum grew stronger. The once unthinkable felt attainable. Hope became practical. Part of this journey settles here. At the moment when questions have fully formed, networks have taken shape, and society stands aware that silence is no longer guaranteed. What followed was not a sudden collapse of old systems, but a long, uneven negotiation as societies tested how far they could bend without breaking and discovered that adjustment required far more imagination than simply maintaining familiar rules. As women pressed forward, they learned that visibility created responsibility because being heard meant facing criticism, misunderstanding, and exhaustion, all while continuing daily lives that did not pause politely for historical moments. Campaigns became more organized, turning scattered energy into structured movements that relied on meetings, letters, pamphlets, and speeches to keep ideas alive across distances and generations. Leadership emerged gradually, often reluctantly, since many women did not begin with ambitions of prominence, yet found themselves guiding others simply by speaking clearly when silence no longer felt possible. Opposition sharpened alongside progress, because each gained right revealed the possibility of another, and those invested in limits responded by drawing lines more fiercely. Public debates grew louder, filling newspapers and parliaments with arguments that framed equality as either moral advancement or dangerous experiment, depending on who held the pen. The clash of opinions tested patience, forcing movements to refine their language, choose strategies carefully, and decide when compromise served progress or delayed it. Voting rights became a focal point, not because they promised instant solutions, but because representation symbolized recognition, and recognition reshaped how citizens understood their relationship with power. Winning the vote, where it happened, felt both triumphant and incomplete, since political voice did not immediately guarantee social equality or economic fairness. Nevertheless, ballots changed expectations as women entered civic life with new confidence and learned that participation trained skills once denied through exclusion. Governments adjusted slowly, discovering that inclusive systems require rethinking laws, institutions, and assumptions embedded deep within administrative habits. Progress moved unevenly across regions as some nations advanced quickly while others resisted stubbornly, illustrating that history rarely follows a single path forward. Global communication spread lessons, allowing movements to learn from successes and mistakes beyond their borders. Shared experiences link struggles across oceans, even when outcomes differ dramatically. Workplace reforms followed closely, since political rights raised questions about economic independence and fairness within industries that relied heavily on women's labor. Demands for fair wages, safe conditions, and reasonable hours exposed contradictions between profit and dignity that many societies had previously ignored. Strikes and negotiations revealed courage, as women risked income and security to challenge practices treated as unchangeable facts of life. Slowly, standards improved, though progress often arrived through persistence rather than celebration. Education expanded alongside these changes, as families and institutions recognized that opportunity multiplied when learning included everyone. Educated generations carried expectations higher, reshaping norms through daily practice rather than loud proclamation. Change settled into routines. Cultural representation shifted gradually as stories, art, and public memory began acknowledging women as decision-makers rather than background figures. This recognition altered imagination itself, teaching children that leadership and contribution wore many forms. Resistance lingered stubbornly in attitudes and traditions, reminding reformers that laws alone could not transform beliefs overnight. Yet beliefs adapt through repetition, exposure, and lived example. Every visible role model quietly rewrote possibilities. Change continued through ordinary moments. History unfolded between headlines. Importantly, movements fractured and regrouped as priorities evolved and disagreements emerged over strategy, inclusion, and pace. Some voices demanded faster transformation, while others favored gradual reform to protect fragile gains. Conflict tested unity, but also strengthened clarity. Learning how to argue productively became a skill as vital as protest. Survival required flexibility, patience, and renewed commitment. Progress matured through tension, balance replaced urgency. As decades passed, earlier demand inspired new questions about identity, rights, and equality beyond gender alone. Movements expanded their scope, recognizing that justice rarely belongs to a single group in isolation. Lessons learned from earlier struggles guided later ones. Experience replaced theory. History offered instructions written in effort rather than ink. Memory became a tool. The past advised the future. Today's world reflects this layered journey, showing gains achieved alongside work unfinished, progress visible yet incomplete. Rights once debated now feel ordinary, which may be their greatest success. Ordinary freedoms reshape expectations quietly. Children inherit possibilities normalized through struggle they never witnessed. Change embeds itself subtly. Legacy outlives conflict. The story continues forward.